With that, let's get started because on everyone's mind for the last month, but definitely this is the crunch time among the many, many things that are happening in Israel. Many not so great, but one for sure that is coming up that's on the minds of many is Pesach. Pesach, the Hebrew word for Passover, is the most celebrated Jewish holiday in the world. It is such a big deal in Israel, not just that we've been spending weeks preparing for it, and it's what everyone talks about. We have so many unique things on the one hand that define Pesach to know it's important. For example, in Israel, we're going to watch a commercial from TV right now because if you watch Israeli TV in the last month, the only things you'll see ads for are cleaning products, food, and perfume. Right? That may seem very weird to a lot of us. Why all of a sudden, in the weeks leading up to Pesach, do you see so many commercials for perfume? You also see a lot for chocolate. The only other time of the year you see that is Rosh Hashanah. All of a sudden, there's all these commercials for perfume, international luxury brands, and they have, the subtitles are in Hebrew, or sometimes they're dubbed over in Hebrew. What's that about? Well, if you're going to someone's house for a festive meal, in this case for Leil Seder, we'll talk about that in a minute, it's customary to bring a gift. For some people, that includes bringing perfume. I would not recommend bringing to family or friends a bottle of perfume after they spent hours cooking. That doesn't say such nice things about them nor their general state of hygiene, but maybe to a loved one who isn't so much involved, or wine or chocolate or anything else. But this just shows how important this holiday season is. And what we're going to look at today, as we've looked at in past years, are words that we think only have to do with Leil HaSeder, with the Seder night, and with Pesach. But in fact, we use in modern Hebrew all throughout the year. So even though they're special, they're not that special in that we only use them once a year, like many of the things we're about to do this week. Instead, we use them all year round. But first, to get you in the mood, I want to show you one of those commercials because they're all great. But this one is great also because it has very few words involved in it. It doesn't take much to understand. If I can find it, hopefully I can. Here it is. Okay, let's watch it together before we get started. Just an important taste of Israel from abroad. Okay, just pull it up again. Share. Sound. Here we go. Okay, this is from Hamashbir Letzalchan, Israel's only department store that's been around for even before the state of Israel was founded. Okay, you don't need to know much Hebrew. Obviously, I'll translate at the end. There's that perfume.
לחג הראשון,
היי, חג שמח, מה שלומכם?
שאת לא מארחת.
L'Chag HaRishon, the very first holiday, and you see the older woman hugging, her eyes closed, looking in intense deepness. Why? She'at lo me'amarachat, that you aren't the host.
משביר, לרגעים חדשים.
Lilgaim chadashim, for new moments.
חג שמח.
Chag Sameach, have a happy Pesach. Right? Very cute. Great way to get people understanding it's the small things, but it's also the new things. With that, let's get started with today's vocabulary list. So as always, you are welcome to screenshot, pen and pencil, sit back and watch. You'll get a recording of this video along with a copy of the spreadsheet after class. Okay. And at the top of the hour, like I said, I'll take questions. I'll talk about the schedule, and I'll tell you about this week's Cafe Oleh conversations on Wednesday. Definitely one not to miss. So first off, let's start with the most important, right? The name of the holiday is Pesach. Yes, there's an English word. Yes, even many observant Jews and people around the world will use the term Passover, but the holiday's name is Pesach. Right? Pesach comes from the it comes from the word lifsoach, the verb lifsoach, which means to skip or to pass over. right? Literally to pass over. That's the whole idea, right? Lifsoach. We don't use this verb very often in modern Hebrew. You'll hear it every once in a while, but you really rarely will hear this on a regular basis. And then finally, sorry, I just need to reshare the screen so it doesn't have any things in it. Good. Finally, in this category, very important for those of you who are religiously observant or want to know or are going to a home that is ritually observant, it's important to know the term kasher lePesach. Kasher lePesach means kosher for Passover. We talked about kasher last week, right? Kasher is the modern Hebrew way that we say kosher, right? So kasher lePesach is actually the correct way to say it. It has to do with some complex voweling rules in Hebrew, but don't worry about it. You can say kasher lePesach and you're all right. Means kosher for Passover. In many communities, especially English-speaking communities, we often condense that. We turn that into an abbreviation KP, right? And so you'll ask people, is this product KP? Meaning, is it kosher for Passover? In Hebrew, we can say kashlap, right? Kashlap is the acronym, is the abbreviation of kasher le Pesach, and we just condense it, and you'll see on many products, if it doesn't say kasher le Pesach, it'll simply say kashlap, and it'll be spelled like that. And that means that it's kosher for Passover. Okay? One of the most important things, and we've talked about before, differences in celebrating holidays between Israel and diaspora communities. And this is one of the biggest ones the whole year. And it comes down to this teeny tiny thing that literally means teeny tiny thing. Kitniyot. Kitniyot has the root, the shoresh, as you see on the left-hand side, kuf tet nun, right? Kuf tet nun gives us the word katan, small. Kitniyot are a variety of things that aren't necessarily biologically connected. And that's a really important distinction. They're not biologically connected because this can include legumes, this can include pulses, this can include certain grains and some other miscellaneous things. So kitniyot in modern Israel, not just in terms of kashrut, but in modern Israel can include things like quinoa, it can include things like corn, lentils, beans, rice, barley, wheat groats, buckwheat, all sorts of small things that we eat often have to be soaked and cooked for long periods of time. What does that have to do with Pesach? Because in addition to the things you're not supposed to eat, and we're going to get into that in a lot in just a second, um, some people, particularly of Ashkenazi background, Central and Eastern European Jews, will not eat kitniyot. There's a long-standing tradition to that. Keep in mind, however, and we talk about this a lot, that in Israel, the vast majority of Jews come from Middle Eastern and Mediterranean backgrounds, communities, which did eat kitniyot on Pesach. And so the vast majority of Jews in Israel, even the most fervent observant ones, will eat kitniyot. So when you are looking at labels in Israel at this time of year, it's very important to look if this is of relevance to you. You need to look and it says lelo chashash kitniyot, without fear of including kitniyot. Lelo chashash, without fear, kitniyot. Okay? Or it'll say the opposite. Le ochle kitniyot, for the eaters of kitniyot, literally, but it means for kitniyot eaters, meaning for people who eat kitniyot, which is an increasingly large amount of people, not just Jews of Middle Eastern and Mediterranean, North African background, but also Jews from Hatnua Masoretit, the conservative movement. Many others will eat kitniyot on Pesach for reasons. These are important terms for you to know whether you eat them or not. It's not a judgment. It's not telling you anything, but it is explaining why. I remember one of my first years in Israel, one of the few years I've been in Israel for Pesach or leading up to it rather, and a woman was shopping in the supermarket, clearly a tourist, and she screamed in the middle of the aisle in English, why do so many products have kitniyos? And everyone looked at her. I mean, this was a English-speaking neighborhood, but everyone looked at her like, "Are you for real? Do you know anything about Israeli society?" So this is an important distinction slash I hope you never have to say that out loud also because modern Hebrew folks kitniyot, not a judgment, but that's how people will understand you in the modern state of Israel, not using an accent that comes from a diaspora community. Modern Israel, modern Hebrew kitniyot. Lelo chashash kitniyot or leochle kitniyot, you do you. How do we say the Seder night? In Seder night or the Seder table or however you want to pronounce it, or however you say it in English or any other language, in Hebrew is Leil HaSeder. Leil coming from the word Laila, night, and Seder simply means the not only the Seder, as we say in American English inflected Hebrew, but Seder, remember, also means order, right? And so what we're doing that night is going through an order of things to remind ourselves of the bondage we were inflicted upon and we were inflicted by and leaving and our freedom, right? So Leil HaSeder is how we say the Seder night. Obviously, remember that in Israel, one night of Leil HaSeder, the only people celebrating two nights are people who are both from abroad and hold on to the tradition of holding on to two nights. Otherwise, in Israel, it's only one Seder. Another great reason to make Aliyah for those of you who find the whole process a bit much. Only one night celebrated of Seder in Israel. The Seder plate, interestingly enough, is called Ke'arat HaSeder. It's not called a plate in Hebrew. It's called a ke'ara. A ke'ara in modern Hebrew is a bowl, right? And it's understood that at certain times and in certain communities, it wasn't a flat plate. It was actually raised on the sides. Excuse me. So it's known if you are looking to buy one in Israel, you will find people who will translate it literally for tourists, but in Hebrew, it's typically called ke'arat haseder, literally the Seder bowl rather than the Seder plate. Even if it is flat, it's called a ke'ara. Okay, let's get to some other important things. This is a really interesting, I think this is interesting in that modern Hebrew preserves certain words from Jewish languages around the world, right? We have Hebrew, which is the Jewish language, and then we have what we call Jewish languages or auxiliary Jewish languages. These are the ones when you couldn't use Hebrew, either because it was too holy to use or it wasn't known well as much. So we have the two big ones, Yiddish and Ladino. We have many others. Yiddish and Ladino still give us many words in modern Hebrew that we just couldn't get rid of because they came with a lot of tradition and memory behind them that it was too difficult to find or replace them with modern Hebrew. Case in point, in modern Hebrew, you will never see kadure matzah for matzah balls. You will never see a literal translation of the English matzah balls into literally balls of matzah, kadure matzah. They're called and known only in the modern state of Israel as knedlach. Knedlach, those of you who know that term, is the Yiddish term for matzah balls. That is how they're called. Whether you're getting them homemade, you're getting them out of a mix, whatever it is, knedlach. Okay? Those are one of those things that has just stuck around. It's not going to change anytime soon. Okay. This came up the other week in our Cafe Oleh conversation class, a great reminder and opportunity for you all to join if you've never done before, because you get to ask more pointed questions and one-on-one at that. So one of the questions was they were already doing Pesach shopping and they saw that a product said on it, lelo chashash, right? That term we had before about kitniyot, without fear of matzah shvuya, and they didn't know what matzah shvuya was. So matzah we'll talk about always, especially as we just talked about knedlach, but matzah, you know, matzah, however you pronounce it, modern Hebrew matzah, shvuya. Shvuya means soaked. Okay, and it comes from the verb, our next verb here, lahashrot. Lahashrot in modern Hebrew means to soak, to marinate, or to infuse. So in one of my many side gigs, doing a lot of infusions in cocktails, that's called hashraot. Okay. Lahashrot is to soak or to marinate or to infuse. That could be food, that could be fabric, that could be anything. one of the traditions of Pesach by some is not to eat matzah shruya, meaning that you don't soak matzah in any capacity with a liquid for fear that it might be the thing you're not supposed to eat, which we'll talk about in just a minute, right? For those of you who know this, in Yiddish it's called gebrachts, as it comes traditionally by certain Ashkenazi communities don't eat gebrachs. So if that's of a concern for you, in modern Hebrew, gebrachs is known as matzah shruya, literally soaked matzah. Okay, so another word you're going to hear all the time, right? If something is marinated, it's mushre. It's from our verb here, lahashrot, and from its participle shruya. Again, proving how the words we think we use only once a year actually show up all the time. And here is the greatest example of them all. I think this is one of the coolest roots of all in Hebrew, is chet mem tzadi, aka chametz, right? We are told to, in many ways, hate on chametz at this time of year. What is chametz? Chametz is that thing you're not supposed to eat, no matter what your tradition is this time of year. Chametz, the technical ruling, is a combination of water and any one of the 5 grains listed in Jewish tradition that are allowed to sit for more than 18 minutes. The grains being wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oats, not allowed to sit for more than 18 minutes because then it becomes chametz. Chametz meaning what? What does chametz actually mean? We understand what chametz means a lot by what we see its modern usage of that same root, chet mem tzadi. So let's look at some modern words we use all the time, all throughout the year, even on Pesach itself, that have the same root. To understand what chametz actually is referring to happening in that over 18 minutes. First off, chamutz. Chamutz is sour. That is as much a taste, right? It's one of the 5 tastes. But chamutz, we've talked about before, is also a way you can describe someone. If you call someone chamutz, they are very cynical. They are very judgmental. They're very introverted. It's obviously not a compliment to be called chamutz, right? But it can also, if that's the type of food you eat, it's called chamutz, sour. From the same root, we get the word chometz. Chometz is vinegar, right? So already we're getting a sense of what chametz has to do with it. It's something being allowed to ferment, right? It's interacting, it's getting sour, right? When things get sour, it's usually because they've fermented. Chometz, right? Vinegar, the epitome of something sour, right? Chamatzmatz is something that's vinegary, either in scent or in taste, right? Words that you use all the time, right? Whether you're making a salad or some dish with chometz, right? And the name of the type of vinegar will appear afterwards. So, for example, if you are someone who likes chometz balsami, that's balsamic vinegar. Chometz tapuchim, apple cider vinegar. Chometz yain adom, red wine vinegar, and so forth. Okay. From the same root, we get the word acid. Now we're going from gastronomy to chemistry, right? Chumtza is acid. Any kind of acid is chumtza. Okay. From the same root, and this is, I think, where things get interesting, is chamtzan. I love that Hebrew has its own names for elements. Chamtzan is oxygen. Okay. Chamtzan is oxygen, and we had this comment a few weeks ago, someone wanting to know about hydrogen peroxide, something available in Israel, but not nearly as used as frequently as it is in other countries. The technical term for hydrogen peroxide is meman al-chamtzani. Meman is the Hebrew word for hydrogen, al-chamtzani, peroxide, or as it's mainly known, me chamtzan. Me is as much short for water as it is for meman, hydrogen, chamtzan, oxygen. So hydrogen peroxide, those of you who are asking, me chamtzan is how it's known. Okay. Lehachamitz, we can take this same root and turn it into a verb. Lehachamitz can mean to pickle something, right? To cause it to turn chamutz. or to turn sour, but it also means to miss out. And this verb you'll hear all the time. If you're watching TV any time of year and they're advertising something, especially something that's on sale, or it's tickets to something, or it's a one in a lifetime opportunity, they'll say, Al tachamitzu, don't miss out, right? Don't become chametz. Don't become chamutz or chametz. If chamutz is sour, chamutzim, the plural, can also mean pickles. This is the catch-all term for all pickles in Hebrew. Yes, you can specify what's being pickled after the word chamutzim, but chamutzim is the catch-all term. Obviously, the default, like in many countries, is going to be cucumbers, but chamutzim is the catch-all term also for any kind of pickles. From the same root, it keeps going, folks. Machametzet, sourdough bread. Now we're starting to understand this idea of leaving something out to mix with the addition of chamtzan gives us chametz. Machametzet being a great example, right? Water and flour being allowed to sit, the wild yeasts in the air creating the fermentation that's needed to create sourdough bread. Machametzet is sourdough. And then finally, a term that has nothing to do with the Middle East in our neck of the woods, but very much with Northern Europe and North America, and still now very popular in Israel in dried form, chamutziot. Chamutziot, in trying to find a term to describe this berry that does not exist in the Middle East, but does exist in other places, chamutziot, right? They took the term sour and applied it to a foodstuff, because what best defines cranberries, it's that it's chamutz, it's sour. So sour things, chamutziot, cranberries. Okay, let's keep going. Another thing that will appear on your kerat Seder, on your Seder plate or Seder bowl, as it's literally as we just talked about, is maror. Maror, we think we only eat one time of year. First off, in Israel, you can always find the classic chazeret, or more importantly, chrein, the grated horseradish root mixed with beet juice all the time in the refrigerated section. Obviously, this time of year it comes out even more. But the word marir and mar are often interchanged in modern Hebrew to mean bitterish or bitter. Right? If something is mar, it's bitter. Marir means it's bitter-ish. It's not so bad, but it's still, when you describe things or people, you'll often describe them as marir, rather than use mal, and that you're trying to be a little nice, but it's not over the top. What's important, though, however, is that we also have the Aramaic term mal, which has nothing to do with bitter or bitterish, right? Or bitter herbs or anything like that. Mal in Aramaic comes from the same root as in the Hebrew moreh, right? Moreh is a teacher, is an instructor. Mar means the same thing in Aramaic, and we use this as a term of distinction in modern Hebrew to this day. If you call someone Mar, a man, Mar followed by his last name, it's the equivalent of saying Mister, right? It's a very polite way to refer to someone, a male, usually an adult male, but don't confuse it necessarily with calling someone bitter. If you want to call them bitter, usually you hear the term marir. But mal and so means Mr. So-and-so, not bitter so-and-so. Also because remember in Hebrew, the adjective comes after the noun, so it wouldn't make sense. Another thing you may think only appears during Pesach on the Keharat Seder, but actually comes up all the time, is one of my favorites, charoset. I love charoset. I personally make a great one. My aunt makes a great one, but charoset comes in all shapes and sizes, and we use it all the time in modern Hebrew. And in fact, you have it in your kitchen all year round, in your dining room for sure. Cheres. Cheres has the same root as charoset. Even if you don't see it spelled out, you can hear it. Cheres, cheres, or cheres, depending how you say the letter resh, and charoset. Cheres means clay or pottery in modern Hebrew, right? What's the story we're always told? What does charoset signify? The mortar that the ancient Israelites used to make the bricks and bind them together to make Pharaoh's buildings, right? Cheres means clay, and it means pottery. If you're looking for klei cheres, you're looking for ceramics or pottery. Okay, a very common word that's used all the time, and it creates one of our best words, I think, in modern Hebrew, which is chalsina. Chalsina takes the word cheres, clay, pottery, and combines it with the country Sin, China. Put them together, porcelain, right? Because what is porcelain China? Why do we call it porcelain China? Because it's a form of making clay cheres, of pottery, of tools or things like that made out of clay that's fired and created in a specific way, invented in China. Chalsina, porcelain. Okay. One of my favorites and a very, very important one, especially this time of year, especially with a shortage. We talked about a shortage way back when during Corona. We're seeing a shortage again in many places. Very important lesson, folks. The word betza, plural betzim, means egg. Betza, one egg. Betzim, multiple eggs. Even though the word is feminine, excuse me, and it ends with an a, in the plural form, it's betzim, what we normally ascribe to masculine words. Betza, one egg. Betzim, eggs. Okay? This is not the same, and this is always why pronunciation is important. Betza, with the eh vowel under the first letter, is different than bitza, bitza, with an e sound at the first letter. Bitza is a swamp. Betza is an egg, and bitzot are swamps, excuse me. Okay, so really important that you distinguish the two. Funny enough, both are slang terms for Tel Aviv. Why? Why is it a Beitzah? Two reasons. One, because it's also known as the White City, the largest amount of Bauhaus buildings in the world, and that Bauhaus architecture is defined by white facades. So just like the white shell of an egg. Also because it's seen, one of the names is called Bu'a, Habu'a, the bubble, because everyone in Tel Aviv thinks of themselves like they are living in Manhattan and they're the center, but that they live in a bubble, so a round shape. But it's also Habitza, the swamp, because if you've ever spent time in Tel Aviv, not on the beach, in the actual city during the summer, you know what it feels like, aka Bitza, a swamp. Betza, Betzim, egg, eggs. Bitza, Bitzot, swamp, swamps. Important distinction also for your own Hebrew. If you are going to a place in Israel, and this was very important at the time, I think this is still very important when you're practicing in general. And after Pesach, one of our classes is going to be all about possession. As exactly the example I'm going to give you. If you want to ask at a store, do you have eggs for sale? You are only going to ask yesh beitzim, right? Because if you're looking directly at a store owner or the person behind the cash register, it's implied. I'm not asking in general. I'm asking very specific to your store. Do you have eggs on sale? Yesh beitzim, which literally translates to are there eggs? But because I'm in the store and I'm making physical eye contact, it's implied 100% I'm asking, do you have eggs in the store? You should never, ever, ever, ever say, yesh lecha beitzim. Why? Because I said that Beitza is slang for Tel Aviv. Beitza is also slang for something else, literally and figuratively a part of the male anatomy. Okay, so if you say yesh lacha beitzim, as I wrote here in very small letters and very PG, do you have any guts? You don't say yesh lacha beitzim to anyone unless you are looking to pick a fight, or you are putting down someone, or you're trying to buck them up by putting them down. You would never say to a complete stranger, "Yesh lecha betzim." Those are words for fighting, as they say. Okay? Yesh betzim is the only acceptable way to ask, do you have eggs for sale? We're going to talk more about possession after the Pesach break. And speaking of break, Pesach ends. Remember, we talked about the moment Purim ends, we get into this getting ready for Pesach. The moment Purim ends, we get ready for Pesach. The moment Pesach ends, we start a whole new holiday. Right? It's a whole new holiday called Mimuna. Mimuna is the first of holidays that we call um, excuse me, is the first of the holidays that we call um, Chagei Edot or Chagigot HaEdot, meaning that it's a holiday that isn't found in the Bible. It's not found in Tanakh. It's not found in any other Jewish tradition. It's found in specific Jewish communities around the world's traditions. In this case, Mimuna comes from North Africa, from North African Jews, which constitute a large population in Israel. One of the largest, in fact. And it's a tradition that they buy back the chametz that was sold to their non-Jewish neighbors, and they start making a festive meal. That's as much about openness as it is about the holiday season in general. There are a lot of different ways to read about it. One of the meanings behind it, the idea is that it comes from the word limamen, the verb limamen, which in modern Hebrew means to fund. Um, that it's a holiday of plenty, of splendor. If you happen to go to one in Israel, you'll see people very lavishly dressed and decorating their tables. It's often a joke that when people are dying to get a invitation to a mimuna because it feels so exclusive because it's so lavish. There are a couple different things that typify mimuna. One of them is the expression that said, even if you're not of North African Jewish, Adu, which is Moroccan Jewish Arabic for may you be prosperous and may you be dined, right? The idea of a welcoming greeting to people is what you say to them. Okay? Both the host and the people coming in. One of the ideas of a Mimuna celebration is that it's Kiyad HaMelech. Kiyad HaMelech is an idiomatic expression in Hebrew that means fit for a king. Okay? And the classic thing that you eat at Mimuna that typifies any Mimuna you go to or don't go to is mufleta. Mufleta of matzah is quickly made, right? So that doesn't turn into chametz. Mufleta is quickly made. They still have sometimes on TV live celebrations of Mimuna, and they'll count down until Pesach is over, and then the moment it's over, you'll see people rushing into the kitchen and quickly putting together things to make mufleta, right? The flour that was either sold to a non-Jewish neighbor or was sold in their homes being used together, mixing it with water and oil and yeast and all sorts of other things and sugar, and making mufleta very thin on a stovetop and just rolling them out figuratively, because then you often roll them up with honey or butter in them and eat them very quickly, also because it's better warm, right? Mufleta, because it's this really quick eating, not just preparing, but also eating, is also slang in modern Hebrew for someone who's overeaten, because it's very easy to eat these a lot very quickly, but also because you're so hurriedly waiting for the holiday to be over to eat chametz again, you quickly like end up eating a lot and you end up becoming a mufleta, right? It's someone who's overeaten. You may be a little bloated and so forth. A few more words before I answer some questions. So we talked about things, but there's also expressions we use all the time that come from Pesach. Manishtana, right? The beginning of what we call in Hebrew Arbat Kushiot or Arba Kushiot, the four questions, right? Manishtana, right? In modern Hebrew, we use all the time. Manishtana is the equivalent of what a shock or what's new. You can also use Manishtana as the equivalent of quelle surprise, right? The same idea. No, what's new with that? Right? Another one that we hear all the time, not just during Pesach, is Dayenu, right? The beginning, or the chorus a popular song sung during the Leila Seder. Dayenu. Dayenu means it would have been enough for us. And we can use this all the time in modern Hebrew as meaning we're good with that. We're okay, or I'm good with that. It can also be translated first person, but also singular, but also plural. We're good, right? Same idea. That would have been enough. We're good. Not we're good as in we're good. We're okay with each other, meaning we're good with that. We're good with your decision. We're good with what you've made. Dayenu. If you're going to a Leila Seder, a little bit of a reminder of some important etiquette. Ma efshar lahavi. Always important to ask when you're invited anywhere, may I bring? Especially important on Pesach, depending on the dietary restrictions of your host. Always important to ask ma efshar lahavi rather than presume to bring something. Okay? Equally important, matai matchilim. When are we starting? Okay? Meaning Leila Seder. And for those of you who really want to genuinely or otherwise lavish it upon your host as to what they've made. Wow, wow, ta'im. Wow, this is delicious. Efshar hamatkon. May I have the recipe? Okay. Kosher and kasher, we talked about last week. I'm not going to remind you again, but I will leave it in this spreadsheet for your use. And finally, before I answer your questions, talk about Wednesday's class and our schedule moving forward, the way to wish someone a happy holiday. Okay, you have a couple different ways. First is Chag Sameach. This is one of the few holidays you can actually just say Chag Sameach. You don't need to say anything else. You don't need to include the name of the holiday. You can simply say Chag Sameach. You're done. A very traditional greeting is Chag Kasher v'Sameach. May you have a kosher and happy holiday. My suggestion is if you do not know the person with whom you are speaking, you don't know them, you don't want to assume anything about them, Chag Sameach always works. You do not need to say Chag Kasher v'Sameach. You don't know the reality of the other person. Best to always stick with Chag Sameach. Pesach, they're keeping kosher for Passover. Chag Kasher v'Sameach is also all right. And then finally, during the intermediate days, what we call in Hebrew Chol HaMoed, between Leil HaSeder at the beginning and the end of the holiday, we typically wish each other Muadim L'Simcha, right? Muadim L'Simcha is the traditional way during that intermediate period. All right, I see we have a bunch of questions. Before I get to them, a reminder that number one, Toda Rabba for joining. Number two, you'll get a copy of this recording and the spreadsheet by email and on YouTube in the next day or so. Number three, on this week's Cafe Oleh Conversations, which you are still more than welcome to join, Wednesday at 8 p.m. Israel time, we're going to be talking about all these terms in the context of getting ready for the Seder. So sharing ideas, traditions, plans, tips with each other, asking each other what our plans are, and hearing more about each other's traditions and maybe of your neighbors, maybe of things that are new for you, all sorts of great ways to share in what is one of, if not the most important holiday in Jewish tradition. It's a great way to practice all this Hebrew, our spreadsheet today, as well as previous ones. So please join us on Wednesday. As I said, after next week, we will be off for Pesach. We then have 3 more classes before we're taking a break, before Cafe Oleh is taking a break for organizational constraints. If you are interested in private lessons for fee, I left my email in the chat. Hi, shouldn't the word be nishtane and not nishtana? Great question. Remember that the Haggadah is both Hebrew and Aramaic. Aramaic being one of those other Jewish languages. It's a language into of itself, but it was adopted as another language, also because it's one of the closest in relation to modern Hebrew. And we have a lot of words in modern Hebrew that come from Aramaic. Mal, we talked about, and nishtana. Nishtana is not modern Hebrew, it is Aramaic. Manishtana is held on to as its own concept. If it was modern Hebrew, it would be mahishtana. It would be binyan hitpael, mahishtana by Laila hazeh. What has changed, or what is changed on this night, right? That's not exactly what we ask in English. but that's what the Hebrew implies. Okay. Quinoa is not kitniyot. You didn't listen to me. I said quinoa is part of the family of kitniyot. It has nothing to do with kashrut. It has everything to do with what we call kitniyot the whole rest of the year. Is knedelach the single and plural? Yes, it's both one and multiple ones. What about shmua matzah? Is that phrase used in Israel? It is, but we use it according to Hebrew, right? And the Hebrew rules are noun followed by adjective. Shmura in non-accented modern Hebrew means watched over, right? That is an adjective. So in modern Hebrew, matzah shmura. Matzah shmura. Is the verb lahashot also used with respect to medical infusions? No, it's not. It's only referred to, that's a great question. Foodstuffs, clothes, things like that. We don't use that term for infusions, infusia, or lehazrik, to inject, but we don't use it for infusions. How would you say sour gummies or sour Skittles? So that's a great question. Israelis actually don't like a lot of things sour. So you're going to use the word chametz, but it's not something very commonly found in Israel. But if you do find something, for example, a gumi chametz or a gumi chamatzmatz, a sour or sourish gummy. New Oleh here and my first Pesach in Israel. B'sha tova. I hope you enjoy it. That's amazing. I've always done the Seder in English and I know it well. If I'm joining an Israeli Hebrew Seder this year, do you recommend I have an English Haggadah with me to keep up still? I definitely agree you should have one if you can find one. Most Judaica bookstores in major cities throughout the country, especially in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, will have ones that have English and Hebrew. One of the best ones, A Different Night, has both English and Hebrew, but you'll also find other ones as well. Great question. Tel Aviv is not built on a swamp. I think my chush humor, my sense of humor is lost on a lot of you. Tel Aviv is not built on swamp. It's built on chol, on sand. But if you've never experienced Tel Aviv in the summer, that is the equivalent of being in a swamp. It is very humid and is very stagnant with not a lot of air, typifying of a swamp. It's a joke, but apparently that's lost on some people. I'm sorry for that. Are gifts only given at work on Pesach or among friends and family as well? Great question. Often during Pesach, before Pesach, you're going to have a haramat kosit. You're going to have a toast at work, and sometimes a shay lachag, a gift card, will be given out to people, or a gift in general, because it is that big of a holiday. Again, the only other time this is done is on Rosh Hashanah. But it's not customary to give a whole lot of gifts out. Usually you would give one to maybe a loved one or the person who's hosting before or after the Leila Seder. But it's not a huge gift giving tradition otherwise. Okay. Why does the diaspora still have two starim? I refer you to a lot of great resources online. I can explain that to you as well, but we're here for modern Hebrew. Why is chometz, I don't know which word you're referring to, is accentuated in the one before the last syllable? Chometz, perhaps. Chometz is how you pronounce it in modern Hebrew. Binyanim, we've done previous lessons on Binyanim, so highly recommend to go back into our previous lessons on YouTube. Why Dayenu can be you, us. Folks, there's a common thing, not just in Hebrew, but in all traditions around the world, that when something is so important to a group of people, it's preserved in time. Think of it, it's fossilized. So even if the meaning changes or we need to adapt it to other people, we don't necessarily, we don't change it. Dayenu is a great example, right? I can say Dayenu for myself, referring to someone doing something, and it's totally understood. I'm not referring to the royal we, I'm not referring to anyone else, but that's the context in which we know the term. Just like manishtana. Manishtana is not modern Hebrew, it's Aramaic. but it's understood because the collective unconscious of the Jewish people and of Israeli Jews is we know that term. Everyone knows that term. And if they don't know that term, they've heard it enough before. That manishtana is understood. We don't need to change it into modern Hebrew. It would lose its appeal. It would lose that it's a 4,000-year-old term. It's actually 2,000-year-old term, right? But referring to something that happened more than close to 4,000 years ago, right? So the part of what we do here is also tapping into Israeli society. We're not teaching a language in a vacuum ever. My style and Cafe Oleh's style. It's about where we learn the language, and we have a context, and it's not just Israeli society, it's also Jewish history. Is it expected we give a gift to the boss before Pesach? Absolutely not. I've never heard of that before. Definitely don't think you need to. And definitely don't give a boss perfume or cologne. That's not a good idea. Is there a parallel tradition with Afikoman in Israel? Absolutely. Afikoman, definitely a part of the Seder experience in Israel. Hiding and bargaining for the prize. Yeah, we don't do it nearly as much, but with a lot of things. For example, but there is the tradition of giving out a present. Absolutely, that is part of it.